Boy Kings of Texas, a memoir by Domingo Martinez, published in 2012 by Lyons Press, an imprint of Globe Pequot Press, which I think is up in Guilford, Connecticut, a far cry from where this book takes place, a border town in Texas called Brownsville. The Rio Bravo goes through it. It's on the west coast and is adjacent to Matamoros, Mexico, where his grandma was born and raised. Domingo Martinez writes about his childhood in the 80s in this border town. He grew up in a clan of people which he describes as Sisyphean wetbacks, and then goes on to describe specifically himself and his brother as indentured children to Mexican peasants, which he ends up backing up. He basically lives on this family compound with half uncles, half brothers, this huge extended family. It's also a trucking company. And every spare moment of his life and his brother's life as a child, after school on weekends, is spent fixing trucks, doing chores around the farm, loading and unloading. There's a scene where he's in high school at this point, and he's playing football in front of it with his brother. He's a freshman, and he shatters his arm. And his brother takes him home, and the first thing his father does upon seeing him with a broken arm is hit him, because he can't pay the hospital bills. He hits him again, knocks him down on his broken arm. His father, his grandmother, and an uncle begin discussing that perhaps a farmhand who knows how to deal with breached births in cattle will be able to set his arm. Finally, his brother Dan has to physically confront the father. And then the mother comes in screaming, saying that my children will not be disfigured, for him to go to the hospital and have the arm set correctly. There are times in the book that he describes the children in his clan to be equivalent to livestock. And again, he backs that up. Later on, he will talk about his reading experience when he would come across books written on concentration camps and how he could relate to the prisoners. He identified with what he says, the grind of that low, tough gear that gets you through an impossible experience seemingly without end, how you just keep on, and hope disappears, and you still go on. He describes an emotional concentration camp where he and his brother are held captive by a petty tyrant and his mother. That petty tyrant is his father, his grandmother. She's a tough, tough woman, has no mercy on family, friends, strangers, nobody. He describes her house as sepulcher-like, crawling with religion. She's a Mexican medicine woman, among many other things. At one point he says, Grandma was the Indian. Grandma was the Aztec in the family. And since she had the balls in the family, we identified culturally as Mexican. The book is funny, thank God, because sometimes it is brutal to read, brutal beyond belief, and sometimes the humor sort of arises out of the abyss. At one point he describes his family. His family was collected on a dark and eerie evening, and then in parentheses he puts what made it eerie. The television had been turned off. You know, very often with the best memoirs, there will be a scene early on that just is so impactful, and you realize you're in the hands of a writer who has the talent to just enthrall you and blow you away again and again. For example, like in the best baseball memoir ever written by Pat Jordan, A False Spring, when he's this 13-year-old fireballer and he's pitching to his father in the street and he explodes his father's thumb. Or in Karen Blixen's Out of Africa, when suddenly you see this parade of wild animals emerging out of the mist. Or Richard Wright's Black Boy, when, you know, he's being persecuted by the neighborhood gang and his mother gives him a grocery list, some money and a stick and says, do not come back in this house until you get everything on that list. And with that stick, he takes ownership of the streets of Memphis. I mean, in this book, there's a scene like that at the start where the father gives this cantankerous, high-strung, skittish dog to his 5 children, and the children take a real fancy to this dog, and the dog ends up getting mauled, just ripped to shreds, killed by a near feral pack of dogs owned by half-brothers and half-uncles. And the way that Domingo Martinez describes his father settling that score, he describes it as almost a Mexican parody of Shakespeare. But when you read that scene and you say, man, this guy is capable of enthralling me, and then he does it again and again and again. I don't know, there's a scene where there's a Christmas pig slaughter and feast. Then there's a scene where he loses his virginity at 16 years old in a hotel with this swinger couple, this fat, disgusting wife. Domingo, who in the book is called Junior, mounts her, and the husband, who looks like Tom Selleck, is watching, and Junior is so disgusted he can't even come, and then he can't even think about sex for months afterwards. Then there's a scene of Domingo getting beat up by his half-uncle, who came into the family at 1 year old through barter. It's like the family gave brake pads to another family so this child could come into the clan. He ends up becoming Domingo's favorite uncle until he becomes this drug, cocaine-stoked muscle man for local drug dealers. Then there's a scene where he and his brother take on an entire fraternity house at Texas A&I University. I'm not sure if that university still exists. Texas Agriculture and Industry. They take on this entire fraternity house. He describes a couple of fights in this book extremely well. There's an LSD trip. I mean, you know, he obviously, one of his literary forebearers is obviously Hunter S. Thompson. He mentions it a couple of times. And the book sometimes has that feel. The hilarity of the two books, there's a scene where Domingo Martinez describes this poofter dog named Rex, who's owned by his sisters, who can't even lift its leg to pee. It is a comic tour de force. Also, I would say the book has a kind of feel of that great collection of short stories by Denis Johnson called Jesus' Son. The style of the book is really, really reduced down, boiled down, distilled. Very often books where excess is cut away. Sometimes the personality is also cut away from the prose. That is not the case with this book. Like Jesus' Son, the tone is sometimes hallucinogenic, between like resigned and astonished, solemn and droll. It's quite impressive. I heard somewhere that this book was optioned by HBO, and that Selma Hayek's, that's the Mexican actress's production company, was behind it. I mean, I'm happy for Domingo Martinez because he deserves, you know, all the financial compensation possible for this book, but it would break my heart to see such a literary gem, which does things only books can do, sullied and polluted by Hollywood images. I mean, I could just imagine the cover of the book right now. It's this cover of like a jalopy in this kind of dusty Mexican background. It's ideal. It's a great cover. I can imagine it being replaced by some film still of some, you know, Latino pretty boy putting on a squinty-eyed tough face staring off into some, you know, dusty Texan plain. God, I hope not. Do I have any bone to pick with this book? I have one. Only one, but I think it's an important one. The Spanish, when there's Spanish in the book, it is disgracefully incorrect. I mean, first of all, I don't want to imply that because the Spanish is incorrect, that has any effect on the authentic nature of this story. In fact, I would even say that it even adds to the authenticity, because there are times when Domingo Martinez says that he decided that he was going to define and make his life in English, not in Spanish. So it doesn't have any effect on the story's credibility or power that the author does not know how to write correct Spanish. But if you are going to publish a book and you're going to put Spanish in that book, and that Spanish is going to be just like the English in black and white on the page, then you have to make sure it's correct. For 10 years of my life, I stopped reading and writing in English to do it in Spanish. I've read classics, I've read contemporary novels and poetry, Spanish in dialect from all parts of the Spanish-speaking world, so I know what I'm talking about. There's one point in the book where he has a character say, "Ven para acá," come here, okay? But the way Domingo Martinez spells it is bien paca, so that if you read it phonetically, it actually means good job, Josephine. It's like ridiculous. Okay, whatever. He has no idea. But Domingo Martinez and Lyons Press and Globe Pequot Press should have hired an editor to correct it. I mean, what's the statement that you're making? That English deserves to be corrected, but Spanish doesn't? I mean, that's like almost shamelessly jingoistic and ethnocentric. You have got to correct the Spanish if you're going to put it in a book. I mean, dozens and dozens of errors. It distracted me from the story. Would I recommend this book? Absolutely. I mean, it is on par, perhaps better than books like All Souls, A Family Story from Southie by Michael Patrick MacDonald, or Townie by Andre Dubus III. Gritty coming-of-age stories about young men who have, through savvy and inborn wisdom and, of course, luck, have survived their unfortunate, dangerous childhoods to be able to tell us the story and illuminate us and make us grateful for the lives we have or the lives we've lived. I mean, absolutely, this book must be read. But the Spanish should have been corrected. The Spanish should have been corrected.